Welcome back to our series, Meeting Jesus. All throughout these recent weeks, we've been walking through the Gospel according to Mark in order to, as the title suggests, meet Jesus, to get to know Jesus of Nazareth more deeply, and to get to know what matters to Jesus, what he's calling us to be like, and how we walk our lives following in Jesus' footsteps. So, in recent weeks, we've made it through chapters 1 and 2. And before we head into new territory, just a couple of things I want to make sure we review. Important themes that Mark has brought to the fore for us. One of them is the important idea of Jesus as somebody who's different because he has authority. He's first sort of walked the talk, shown that what he says he means or he knows what he's talking about. It's in the way he teaches, it's in the way he can speak even to unclean spirits and cast them out without any protest or possibility of resistance from them. It's the way he has authority and power to heal people. And also, Jesus has begun to use that authority to help those who are outcast, including in his circle, tax collectors and notorious sinners, and calling people to follow him as disciples, as well as showing that authority when he heals people. Last time we saw how Jesus starts to be asked questions that you would ask an authority on the subject of religious life or faith or practice. In other words, people start to approach him and ask him questions you'd ask a rabbi. For example, some notice that Jesus and his disciples don't practice ritual fasting like many others in ancient Judaism did. Even some of John the Baptizer's followers would regularly fast, abstain from eating certain foods for a certain time as a spiritual discipline. And Jesus' response to them isn't to say fasting is bad, you should never do it, or, oh, we're going to get around to fasting. He sees himself as somehow qualitatively different, that being in his presence is like being around the life of the party, and you can't help but celebrate. Jesus describes himself like if you're hanging around the groom at the wedding reception, right? If you're invited to a bridal reception or a wedding reception, and they're starting to fill everybody's glasses for the big champagne toast, it's bad form to say, no, I don't think I'm going to have any now. You can't. You have to celebrate, right? This is the reason you're there. Jesus describes his own presence as being not just, I'm an interesting religious teacher, but that by bringing the reign of God, Jesus really is like the life of the party, and that to be around him is to be made more fully alive. So it's a way that same theme of Jesus' distinct presence and authority kind of changes things. The other issue we saw last time was a question about Sabbath observance. You probably know part of ancient Israel's religious life included a day of rest, 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. That's the Sabbath day. That goes back to the ancient DNA of ancient Israel's faith memory. It's the way they told the story about creation. God works and creates for 6 days and then rests. And then when they're set free from slavery, they had never gotten rest under Pharaoh. Now we will get to have a chance to rest. We will no longer be enslaved. We will not enslave each other. This day of rest is a really important central idea. So when Jesus is walking through a field with his disciples and they start plucking grains of wheat, as they're walking through a field, and they start plucking them just to snack on, they're hungry, and they start to eat them, this begins to upset the respectable religious authorities who say, that's work. If you're doing that on the Sabbath, that's labor. You're breaking the Sabbath rule. And Jesus' response was basically to say, I have the authority to tell you on this, and this is not breaking the Sabbath. The point of the Sabbath was not to be this cumbersome, burdensome, one more set of rules you have to worry about. The point of the Sabbath was to bring people to life, to let people rest and be renewed and restored. So you know what? Plucking grain on the Sabbath is not a violation. Jesus ends that discourse by saying, so the Son of Man is even Lord of the Sabbath, because after all, human beings weren't made for the sake of the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day was made for human beings, right? So it's this question of priority, right? That rest, of course, is important, but we don't have to turn this into one more thing we have to do, but more instead, this is a gift that's meant to bring us to life. If you're getting so fussy about it that it's no longer giving life, you maybe misunderstood what Sabbath is about. And Jesus begins to use here a title he's going to keep using for himself throughout Mark's gospel that's got a lot of weight to it. He calls himself the Son of Man. He'll say, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And in a sense, that's sort of a helpful title that doesn't bring all the baggage of titles like Messiah or Christ we'll have to deal with later. But even the title itself, the phrase Son of Man, is kind of an idiom in ancient Hebrew, even as it gets carried into the Greek of Mark's Gospel. And it's got the feel of just saying like a human being, right? The way when in English we might use the expression, every mother's son knows this, every mother's son this, or every mother's son that. It's a way of saying sort of anybody, everybody, any human being, right? The Son of Man, that's a title that basically means in Hebrew something like the really human one. So here Jesus is as one who not only reveals to us what God is like, but also Jesus is one who shows us what it really is to be human. In both senses, Jesus brings a certain authority that all the rest of us, mired as we are in distortions, in ways that sin sort of makes us less than we're supposed to be, Jesus brings us a glimpse of what that fullness looks like. And it's not fear of breaking rules, but this utter freedom of what gives life. All that's hanging in the background as we head into chapter 3, and the first scene we get takes that tension about Sabbath and turns it up a notch. Because instead of just being Jesus and his disciples walking through basically an anonymous field that nobody else is really watching, now Jesus goes into a synagogue, a place of worship. And they're there, everybody there on the Sabbath day for prayer services, right? They'll read the scriptures. It's like coming to church on a Sunday for us. There's Jesus, and somebody is there whose hand is withered. We don't know if it was something from birth, if it's the after effects of an injury or an illness or a sickness or disease, but he comes with his withered hand, and everybody's sort of staring at Jesus. What's he going to do, right? And Jesus asks this powerful question. He asks everybody, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill? And everybody else is silent. Nobody knows what to say. Nobody knows what the right answer is, right? They've all been told the rule on the Sabbath is you don't do any work, and healing somebody would be work, so you're not allowed. And Jesus, for the first time in Mark's Gospel, one of the few times anywhere in the New Testament, it says Jesus gets angry. And in this case, he's angry at their hardness of heart. That other people are so focused on following the rules rightly that they have no compassion for this man and for his suffering. They would almost, you'd think, rather he come back on another day and be healed, rather than why can't he be healed on the spot? Why can't he be brought more fully to life right now? Isn't that really what Sabbath was supposed to be about in the first place? So Jesus says to this man, stretch out your hand, and in the act of stretching his hand out, it's already healed. This is a miracle, an honest to goodness miracle. This guy's got his life back. This is all good news, right? And yet, this is the moment when, as Mark tells it, the Pharisees immediately conspired with the Herodians, that's the party of people affiliated with King Herod, against Jesus, how to destroy him. They're beginning to plot Jesus' death. We're barely into the 3rd chapter, and already the course is set. This is going to be a conflict that ends in Jesus going to a cross. Jesus' death is now on the table as the outcome of the story. It's worth noting, too, that the thing that sets these people off are things that Jesus is convinced are good things, right? He begins to upset people when he includes tax collectors and sinners and outsiders and outcasts in his table fellowship. Now, even more so, people start to get upset at him because he's said that healing is more important than Sabbath observance. He's taking their understanding of God and how God works, what matters to God, and he's breaking it apart. He's turning it on its head. Of course, that's upsetting to people. And as we've been exploring in this whole series, really, Jesus brings us face to face with the question, when our assumptions about Jesus turn out to be different than what Jesus actually says, which will we hold on to and which we will let go of? Will we insist that Jesus has to fit our expectations, even if that means letting go of the real Jesus? Will we let go of our assumptions and the cookie-cutter mold we've been trying to fit Jesus into in order to be drawn into relationship with the real thing, with the real Jesus? So he begins to get people upset, and it's gonna get worse, because in the next scene, here's what happens. Jesus is now moving beyond where he had been. He's going to go with his disciples, it says, to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him. Hearing all that he was doing, they came to him in great numbers from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, beyond the Jordan, and the region around Tyre and Sidon. Now let's stop there for a second. In case you have not committed to memory ancient Israelite geography, that's pretty wide territory. It's expanding out beyond Jesus' initial base of operations. Back in the beginning of chapter 1, Jesus goes to Capernaum and basically uses this town of Capernaum as his base of operations, sort of out of the back door, back porch of Simon Peter's house. And then by the end of chapter 1, he says to his other disciples, well, let's go to the other surrounding towns. So we're starting to expand a little bit. Now, people from further out are hearing about Jesus and coming to him. And the first couple of names that Mark gives are other people within the group you would call Judaism, people who are also Jewish, of Jewish background. Right? Galilee is this pocket of Jewish territory, and Jerusalem and Judea is also this Jewish territory. Jerusalem's the capital, so maybe it feels more like the big city, but still same ethnicity, same culture, same background. But Mark says they're starting to come not just from Judea and Jerusalem, but now from across the border in Idumea. That's traditionally another nation, another people group. They're all conquered by the Romans, of course, but we're now outside the territory of classic ancient Israel. And the region across the Jordan River, that's, Gentile territory. The other two cities Mark names, Tyre and Sidon, those are, you guessed it, Gentile territory. You have to assume some of the people there who are coming to see Jesus are also Gentile, right? And part of the question that Mark is beginning to raise is, what's Jesus going to do when these outsiders come to him? Will he turn them away and say, sorry, you crossed the border into my territory, but you're not welcome here. I'm not here for you. Or will Jesus welcome them and offer healing to them as well? So the next piece of the scene is going to sound kind of familiar, but the real radical change is just who it is who's coming to Jesus. So even though it's going to sound familiar, remember, these are all people from across those boundaries and borders. He had cured many, so that all who had diseases pressed upon him to touch him. When the unclean spirits saw him, they would fall down before him and shout, "You are the Son of God!" And he sternly ordered them not to make him known. We've heard that kind of talk before, haven't we, through Mark's gospel? But now the thing that's changed is outsiders are coming to Jesus, and he's not turning them away. Later there will come a point even further where Jesus pushes the envelope even more and starts crossing the boundaries himself and going outward himself. But now we're taking that next step. They're coming to him, and he's not turning them away or saying, sorry, you're one of those people, you're from across the border, you don't count, I'm not here for you. No, Jesus welcomes them, heals them, just as he had done for people who were like him. All of this is part of what is so scandalous about Jesus, that when he does something like this, welcoming outsiders, associating with the sinners and tax collectors, healing people on the Sabbath, he's not just damaging his own reputation. By announcing that he's brought the reign of God into the world, he's now bringing God's reputation into all this. You can see why this would upset people, because Jesus isn't just making claims about what he thinks is okay. Jesus is saying that God accepts those outsiders, that God's healing includes them, that God's table fellowship includes those outsiders, sinners, tax collectors, and that God's understanding of Sabbath includes healing people on the Sabbath. All that's a lot for people to take in, and you can see why the tension is rising. It's also deeply good news, because it means that nothing holds Jesus back from bringing people to life. Not rules about the Sabbath, not where they're from, what their background is, their language or culture or anything. None of those things hold Jesus back. That's good news. And yet, you can also see the tension that will eventually lead to Jesus having a showdown with the respectable religious people and even with the empire that will take him to a cross. That's where this story is headed, even only just in chapter 3. So we invite you to join us for continuing conversations here. Every week on Thursdays at 1 o'clock here at Community of Christ, we are meeting in person for studying the Bible. If you can't be with us in person, join us for these video catch-up sessions to at least get a glimpse of the conversations we're having as we walk through Mark's Gospel to get to know Jesus. See you next time.